The morning of the wedding looked perfect to everyone inside the grand ballroom of the Royal Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, reflecting warm golden light across polished marble floors. Hundreds of white roses framed the ceremony stage, carefully arranged to create an image of elegance and perfection. The entire event appeared like a celebration designed for magazine covers. Wealthy guests dressed in expensive suits, quiet classical music drifting through the air, and photographers waiting for the moment when the bride would walk down the aisle. To everyone in the room, the day looked flawless. But Elena Carter knew something was terribly wrong. She stood near the back of the ballroom, away from the growing crowd of guests. Her hands were folded calmly in front of her, yet her eyes moved constantly across the room. Elena had always been the observant one in the Carter family. While her older sister Vanessa had spent most of her life drawing attention with natural charm and confidence, Elena had grown comfortable standing in the background, watching, listening, understanding things that others often missed. And this morning, everything felt wrong. Guests continued to arrive through the tall glass entrance doors. Luxury cars stopped outside one after another, delivering influential figures from Chicago's business world. Men with silver hair and expensive watches shook hands politely near the bar. Several political figures spoke quietly with reporters near the entrance. The wedding had attracted attention far beyond the Carter family's normal social circle. But what made Elena uneasy were the guests who didn't seem interested in celebration at all. Near the edges of the ballroom, several groups of men stood together in dark, tailored suits. Their posture was too rigid, their expressions too cold for a wedding celebration. They spoke in low voices, occasionally glancing around the room with careful attention. Some spoke Russian. Others used languages Elena didn't recognize. They belonged to the Volkov family. Even without formal introductions, their presence was unmistakable. For years, the Volkov name had moved quietly through certain conversations in Chicago, not in newspapers or official business records, but in the careful whispers of people who understood how power truly worked. The Volkov organization controlled shipping routes, import businesses, private security companies, and a long list of enterprises that were never fully explained. Their influence stretched far beyond the city. And today, the Carter family had tied their future to that power. Elena looked toward the front of the ballroom where the ceremony arch stood waiting. A row of reserved seats held the most powerful members of the Volkov organization. Several older men sat there already, their expressions calm and unreadable. At the center of that row sat the man everyone seemed careful not to stare at directly, Adrian Volkov. Elena had only seen him a few times before today, but his reputation had reached her long before their families ever met. Adrian Volkov was the only son of Sergei Volkov, the powerful leader of the organization. People described him as intelligent, disciplined, and dangerously unpredictable. He was rumored to control several branches of the Volkov empire, despite being barely in his early 30s. Yet as Elena watched him now, he didn't appear like the violent criminal figure people often described. He sat perfectly still, his posture relaxed, his gaze calm as he observed the growing crowd around him. But there was something unsettling about the way he watched everything. Adrian Volkov missed nothing. Every movement in the ballroom seemed to pass through his quiet attention. Elena quickly looked away. The truth was simple. This wedding had never been about love. 2 years earlier, the Carter family had been one of Chicago's most respected financial names. Their investment firm managed millions of dollars across real estate technology and private equity deals. For decades, the Carters had built their reputation on stability and careful strategy. Then everything collapsed. A chain of disastrous investment decisions triggered a financial crisis that spread through the entire company. Within months, the Carter firm faced lawsuits, debt collectors, and investigations. Banks refused to extend credit. Investors demanded their money back, and business partners quietly cut all contact. The Carter family's fortune began disappearing almost overnight. By the time the crisis reached its worst point, the family stood dangerously close to bankruptcy. Then the Volkov family made their offer, a marriage alliance. If Vanessa Carter agreed to marry Adrian Volkov, the Carter family's debts would be erased. Their remaining businesses would receive immediate financial support. Their reputation would be protected from further investigation. To outsiders, it looked like a miracle solution. But Elena had never believed miracles came from families like the Volkovs. Across the ballroom, Elena's attention shifted toward a line of men standing near the far wall. These were not guests. They were security. Each one wore the same black suit and carried the same quiet authority in their posture. Their eyes scanned the room continuously, never settling on any one place for too long. The way they moved made it clear that their only purpose was control. The Volkov family had not simply attended the wedding. They had secured it. Every entrance was monitored. Every hallway watched. Even the hotel staff seemed uncomfortable moving around them. Elena felt the tension tightening slowly in her chest. Then she thought about Vanessa. Earlier that morning, Elena had visited the bridal suite to see how her sister was doing. Vanessa had been sitting in front of the mirror while a makeup artist finished the final touches on her appearance. But something about her behavior had been strange. Vanessa Carter had always been fearless. She was the type of person who could enter a room full of strangers and command attention within seconds. Confidence followed her naturally. Yet that morning, her reflection in the mirror looked different. Her eyes had seemed distant. Her hands had trembled slightly as she adjusted a silver bracelet around her wrist. Elena had asked if she was nervous about the wedding. Vanessa had simply forced a quick smile and said everything was fine. But Elena knew her sister well enough to recognize when she was hiding something. Now nearly 40 minutes had passed since that moment, and Vanessa had still not appeared. Guests were already taking their seats. The orchestra had started softly playing rehearsal notes. The wedding coordinator moved nervously between the aisles, checking the schedule again and again. From the front row, Elena could see her parents speaking in urgent whispers with the coordinator. Their expressions had changed. Their smiles had disappeared. Time continued moving forward. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The atmosphere inside the ballroom began shifting from excitement to quiet confusion. Guests started checking their watches. Several reporters near the entrance whispered to one another. The orchestra stopped playing. Elena noticed Adrian Volkov. For a brief moment, he had not moved from his seat, but his eyes had shifted slightly toward the hallway that led upstairs to the bridal suites. He knew something was wrong. A few minutes later, the wedding coordinator finally hurried toward the staircase leading to the upper floor. Elena watched as two members of the Carter family followed her. Something inside Elena told her to move as well. She walked quickly across the ballroom and followed the group upstairs. The hallway outside the bridal suite was strangely quiet. The door was closed. The coordinator knocked gently. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. A small wave of unease moved through everyone standing in the hallway. Finally, the coordinator slowly pushed the door open. The room inside looked untouched. Soft lighting glowed around the vanity mirror. The wedding dress hung carefully beside the wardrobe. Makeup tools remained scattered across the table where the artist had been working earlier. But the bride was gone. Vanessa Carter had disappeared. Elena stepped into the room slowly, her heart beginning to race. Everything looked exactly as it had earlier that morning, except for one thing. On the vanity table, resting beside the mirror, was a small folded piece of paper. No one moved for several seconds. The silence in the room became suffocating. Then Elena realized something far worse than a missing bride. Vanessa hadn't left in panic. She had left on purpose, because the note sitting on the vanity suggested she had planned her escape long before the wedding day ever arrived. In the world of organized crime, broken agreements are never forgiven. The realization settled over the Royal Meridian Hotel like a slow-moving storm. What had begun as a celebration of wealth and influence quickly transformed into something colder, darker, and far more dangerous. Upstairs, inside the silent bridal suite, the folded note resting on the vanity table had already changed everything. Elena Carter stood near the doorway, watching as the members of her family stared at the piece of paper that Vanessa had left behind. No one rushed to open it immediately. The hesitation came from a quiet understanding shared by everyone in the room. Whatever the note said would not simply explain Vanessa's absence. It would determine their future. The wedding coordinator was the first to break the silence. Her voice trembled slightly as she asked if someone should notify the groom's family. That suggestion sent a wave of visible panic across the Carter relatives gathered in the suite. Because once the Volkov family learned the bride had vanished, the situation would no longer belong to the Carter family. It would belong to them. Elena watched as her father finally stepped forward and picked up the note with unsteady hands. His eyes scanned the short message quickly, and the color drained from his face almost instantly. Vanessa had not been kidnapped. She had escaped. The note did not offer many details, but its meaning was unmistakable. Vanessa had made the decision to leave long before the wedding ceremony began, and she had done so knowing exactly what consequences might follow. Within minutes, the news spread quietly through the upper floors of the hotel. Downstairs in the ballroom, the change in atmosphere became impossible to ignore. Guests who had once laughed over glasses of champagne now spoke in low whispers. Hotel staff moved nervously between tables, unsure how to respond. The orchestra had stopped playing entirely. The wedding had not simply been delayed. Something had gone terribly wrong. Near the front of the ballroom, several members of the Volkov family had already begun speaking urgently with one another. Their calm expressions had hardened into something far more controlled and calculating. Then the man everyone in the room seemed to avoid appeared. Sergei Volkov. He entered the ballroom slowly, surrounded by several trusted associates who followed closely behind him. Unlike the younger members of his organization, Sergei carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades building power. He was older than most people expected, his silver hair neatly combed back, his movements measured and deliberate, but nothing about his appearance suggested weakness. If anything, the calmness in his eyes made him more intimidating. Sergei Volkov did not raise his voice. He did not demand explanations. Instead, he simply stood at the center of the ballroom and waited. One by one, the conversations around him stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouted accusation. Everyone in the room understood what Sergei Volkov represented. His organization controlled vast criminal networks across Eastern Europe and several major cities in the United States. Shipping routes, private security firms, underground financial systems. His influence moved quietly through industries that rarely appeared in official records. And now that influence had been publicly insulted. Because of Volkov, wedding had just collapsed. Upstairs, the Carter family received a message that Sergei wanted answers immediately. Elena followed her parents back down the staircase with a growing sense of dread pressing against her chest. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time they reached the ballroom floor, Sergei Volkov was already watching them. His gaze moved slowly across the Carter family, studying their faces with the careful patience of a man who understood power better than anyone else in the room. No anger appeared in his expression, but that absence of emotion felt far more threatening. Elena stood quietly beside her parents as her father attempted to explain the situation. He spoke carefully, choosing each word with obvious fear. He insisted the Carter family had no involvement in Vanessa's disappearance and that they had only discovered the note minutes earlier. Sergei listened without interruption. When her father finished speaking, the older man remained silent for several long seconds. Then he asked a single question. "Where's the bride?" No one in the Carter family had an answer. Around the edges of the ballroom, several Volkov associates had already begun making phone calls. Quiet orders passed between them rapidly. Within minutes, cars began leaving the hotel parking area, heading out into the city. The search for Vanessa Carter had begun. Chicago was suddenly filled with men looking for a missing bride. Elena felt the weight of the situation growing heavier with every passing moment. She understood something that many of the guests in the room did not. This was not simply a family disagreement. This was a broken contract between powerful organizations. And contracts in the world of organized crime were never broken without consequences. For the first time since the chaos began, Elena allowed herself to look directly toward Adrian Volkov. He remained seated in the front row where the ceremony had been scheduled to begin. His posture was still calm, his expression unreadable. If he felt anger or humiliation over the disappearance of his bride, he showed none of it. Instead, Adrian watched the unfolding scene with the same quiet attention Elena had noticed earlier that morning. He was studying everything, every reaction, every detail. The strange part was that he did not appear surprised. Elena could not explain why that thought unsettled her so deeply. Across the ballroom, Sergei Volkov finally began speaking again. This time, his voice carried across the entire room. He explained calmly that the Volkov family had spent months preparing for this alliance. Business arrangements had been made. Partnerships had been negotiated. The marriage between Vanessa Carter and Adrian Volkov had been designed to strengthen both families. Now the bride had vanished on the morning of the ceremony. To Sergei Volkov, that was not an unfortunate accident. It was an insult. His gaze shifted slowly toward the Carter family again. The silence that followed made Elena's pulse race, because everyone in the room understood what Sergei was thinking. Someone had betrayed the agreement, and betrayal required a response. Elena's mother began speaking quickly, her voice shaking as she insisted that Vanessa had acted alone. She promised that the Carter family would cooperate with the search and help resolve the situation however possible. But even as she spoke, Elena could see the truth settling into the room. The Carter family no longer controlled what would happen next. Their future now depended entirely on the Volkov family's decision. Sergei Volkov listened patiently to every explanation. When the Carter family finally finished speaking, he nodded slowly. Then he gave his answer. The marriage agreement between their families would not be canceled. The deal had been signed. The alliance had been arranged. And in the world of powerful men like Sergei Volkov, agreements were not erased simply because circumstances became inconvenient. If the original bride had disappeared, the contract would still be honored because the wedding was still going to happen. The Volkov family did not cancel agreements. They enforced them. The silence that followed Sergei Volkov's announcement seemed to freeze the entire ballroom in place. Guests who had only moments earlier been whispering quietly among themselves now watched the scene with growing curiosity, sensing that something important was unfolding, but unable to understand the full weight of it. For the Carter family, however, the meaning of Sergei's words was painfully clear. This wedding was not over. Sergei Volkov stood calmly at the center of the room, his expression composed, his posture perfectly relaxed. He looked less like a man reacting to a crisis, and more like someone solving a minor inconvenience. To him, Vanessa Carter's disappearance was not a reason to cancel the alliance. It was simply a complication, and complications could always be corrected. Elena stood beside her parents, her heartbeat growing louder with every passing second. Something about Sergei's calmness unsettled her more than anger would have. If he had shouted or threatened the Carter family openly, at least the situation would have felt predictable. But Sergei Volkov did neither. Instead, he spoke in a quiet voice that carried across the ballroom with absolute control. The marriage contract between the Carter and Volkov families had already been signed. Business agreements tied to the union had already been finalized. Financial transfers had already begun. From Sergei's perspective, the wedding was not simply a ceremony. It was a transaction, and transactions were never abandoned. Elena watched her father struggle to respond. His voice came out strained as he explained again that Vanessa had acted alone, that the family had no knowledge of her plan to disappear. Sergei nodded slightly, acknowledging the explanation without challenging it. But his next words changed everything. If the original bride had chosen to break the agreement, then the Carter family would simply provide another. For a moment, Elena thought she had misunderstood him. The idea sounded impossible. But the room around her had gone completely still. Every member of the Carter family slowly turned toward her. Only then did the full meaning of Sergei's proposal settle into place. Vanessa Carter might have disappeared, but the Carter family still had another daughter, Elena Carter. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs as the weight of Sergei's words pressed down on her. For several seconds, she couldn't even speak. Around her, the Carter family reacted with visible shock. Her mother shook her head in disbelief while her father struggled to find words. Elena herself remained frozen, because somewhere deep inside, she already understood the truth. This was not a suggestion. It was a demand. Sergei Volkov did not raise his voice when he explained the reasoning behind his solution. His tone remained calm, almost polite, as though he were describing a simple business adjustment. The Carter family had benefited from the agreement, with the Volkov organization. Their debts had already begun disappearing. Their financial stability had already been restored. Those benefits, Sergei explained, had come with expectations. If the Carter family refused to honor their side of the arrangement now, the consequences would extend far beyond embarrassment. Financial agreements could be reversed, business partnerships could be withdrawn, and powerful enemies could appear very quickly. Elena could see the understanding spreading slowly across her parents' faces. Refusing Sergei Volkov would not simply end the wedding. It could destroy their entire family. For the first time since the chaos began, Elena turned her eyes toward Adrian Volkov again. He had not spoken a single word during the entire discussion. Still seated in the front row near the ceremony arch, Adrian watched the conversation unfold with quiet attention. His posture remained relaxed, his expression calm, giving away nothing about what he might be thinking. That silence made him even more unsettling. Most men would have shown anger or humiliation after being abandoned at the altar. Yet Adrian displayed neither. He simply observed the situation with the same careful focus he had shown earlier in the day, as though he were studying the outcome of a strategic game. Elena wondered if he had already expected this possibility. Across the ballroom, Sergei's gaze shifted slowly toward her. For the first time, she felt the full weight of his attention. It was not cruel, it was not angry, but it was unmistakably powerful. Sergei, Elena Carter had expected a prison disguised as a marriage. What she entered instead was something far more complicated and far more dangerous. The wedding ceremony itself passed like a strange dream. Only a few hours earlier, the entire event had been arranged for Vanessa Carter. The floral arrangements, the seating chart, the carefully printed programs. Everything had been designed with a different bride in mind. Yet now Elena stood at the center of the same ceremony, wearing the same white dress that had been prepared for her sister. The ballroom remained filled with hundreds of guests, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What had once been excitement had turned into controlled curiosity. The sudden change in bride had been explained publicly as a private family adjustment, though few people seemed fully convinced. Whispers moved quietly between the rows of seats. Some guests appeared confused. Others looked entertained by the unfolding drama. But the most powerful people in the room did not whisper at all. The Volkov family members watched the ceremony with calm expressions, as if nothing unusual had happened. For them, the wedding was simply continuing as planned. Elena barely remembered walking down the aisle. The music had started again, softer than before, and the crowd had turned toward her with polite applause. Every step she took toward the ceremony arch felt strangely distant, as though she were observing someone else's life from outside her own body. At the end of the aisle stood Adrian Volkov. He had not changed expression when she approached him. His face remained composed, his posture relaxed, his dark eyes steady as they followed her movements. If he felt any emotions about marrying a woman who had replaced her sister only hours earlier, he showed none of them. The ceremony itself was short. The officiant spoke calmly about unity, partnership, and the joining of families. Elena heard the words but struggled to absorb their meaning. The moment felt too surreal to fully process. When the vows were exchanged, Adrian's voice remained steady and controlled. Elena repeated the same promises, though inside she understood that the words meant something very different for both of them. This was not a marriage built on love. It was a contract between powerful families. By the time the ceremony ended, Elena Carter had officially become Elena Volkov. The applause that followed sounded distant and hollow. Photographers quickly gathered near the ceremony arch to capture images of the newly married couple. Flashing lights filled the ballroom as guests approached to offer polite congratulations. Most of them spoke carefully. Some seemed curious about the sudden change in bride. Others appeared more interested in observing the powerful Volkov family up close. Through it all, Adrian remained calm. He moved through the crowd with the ease of someone accustomed to attention. Several influential guests greeted him with visible respect, even deference. His reputation clearly extended far beyond the private rumors Elena had heard growing up. Yet what unsettled Elena most was how natural Adrian seemed in this world. The tension of the day had not affected him at all. It was as if the entire situation had unfolded exactly as expected. Later that evening, after the reception concluded, Elena's new life began moving forward with unsettling speed. Instead of returning to the Carter family home in Chicago, she traveled with Adrian and several members of the Volkov organization to New York. The journey itself felt strangely silent. Most of the men traveling with them spoke quietly among themselves in Russian. Elena sat beside Adrian for much of the flight, unsure whether she should speak. He did not attempt conversation. He simply worked through documents on a tablet, while occasionally glancing out the airplane window. Hours later, their car passed through the tall iron gates of the Volkov estate. The mansion stood on a large private property overlooking the Hudson River, surrounded by thick trees and high stone walls. Even in the dim evening light, the estate looked enormous. Several security checkpoints guarded the entrance road. Each gate opened only after careful inspection. Elena realized quickly that the property functioned less like a home and more like a fortress. When the car finally stopped in front of the main entrance, several staff members were already waiting. The mansion itself was massive, 3 stories of dark stone architecture with tall windows and sweeping staircases visible through the front doors. The design combined old European elegance with modern security features that Elena noticed immediately. Cameras watched every corner of the entrance. Guards stood quietly near the surrounding hallways. As Elena stepped inside, the scale of the building became even more impressive. Marble floors stretched across a wide entrance hall decorated with historic paintings and antique sculptures. A grand staircase curved upward toward the second floor, where long hallways disappeared into quiet shadows. This was the center of the Volkov Empire, and Elena had just become part of it. Within hours of arriving, she began noticing the strict rules that govern life inside the mansion. Certain areas were restricted without permission. Security personnel moved through the hallways constantly. Every visitor entering the property passed through multiple checkpoints. Even the household staff followed precise schedules and procedures. The entire estate operated with military precision. Over the next few days, Elena slowly met several important figures inside the Volkov organization. There was Viktor Sokolov, one of Sergei Volkov's oldest advisors, a man whose quiet intelligence seemed to guide many of the family's business decisions. There was Natalia Orlov, the head of internal operations, responsible for coordinating communication between the family's international enterprises. And there were several other associates whose roles were never explained directly, but whose influence was obvious. Each of them treated Elena with polite respect. But Elena noticed something else. They were also watching her. Not openly, not rudely, but carefully. She was now part of the Volkov family, and that meant everyone inside the organization needed to understand exactly who she was. During this time, Elena also began observing Adrian more closely. Despite his calm demeanor, his role inside the family was far more complicated than she had initially realized. Many of the organization's senior members seemed to defer to his decisions even when Sergei Volkov was present. Adrian spent long hours reviewing financial reports, holding private meetings, and managing operations that stretched far beyond New York. Rumors about his past circulated quietly among the household staff. Some claimed Adrian had taken control of several rival operations before turning 30. Others suggested he had personally eliminated threats against the Volkov organization. No one ever explained these stories fully, but the fear in their voices suggested they believed them. Elena tried to focus on adapting to her new environment, yet one uncomfortable realization followed her constantly. She was never truly alone. Security cameras monitored every hallway. Guards appeared quietly whenever she moved through certain areas of the estate. Even the household staff seemed to report information about daily activities. The mansion was not simply a residence. It was a controlled environment designed to protect the Volkov Empire, and now Elena lived inside it. Several nights after arriving in New York, Elena found herself unable to sleep. The unfamiliar surroundings, the overwhelming changes in her life, and the lingering questions about Vanessa kept her mind restless. Late that night, she quietly left her room and walked down one of the long upstairs hallways. Most of the mansion was dark. Only a few lamps illuminated corridors. As Elena turned a corner near the main staircase, she suddenly heard voices coming from a partially open door nearby. She recognized one of them immediately, Sergei Volkov. His deep voice carried clearly through the quiet hallway. Another man stood inside the room with him, speaking in a tense tone that Elena could not fully hear. She had no intention of listening, but one sentence stopped her completely. Sergei's voice lowered slightly as he spoke. He mentioned Vanessa Carter, and the next words he said sent a chill down Elena's spine, because according to Sergei Volkov, Vanessa had not simply run away from the wedding. She had discovered something about the Volkov family that she was never supposed to know. The deeper Elena moved into Volkov world, the more she realized something unsettling. Her marriage had never been about saving the Carter family. It had been about controlling something far more valuable. The realization began quietly in the days following the conversation she overheard in the hallway. Sergei Volkov's words about Vanessa refusing to leave Elena's mind. The tone in his voice had not sounded angry or emotional. Instead, it carried the careful caution of a man discussing a dangerous problem. Vanessa had discovered something important enough that the Volkov family still spoke about it in private. That thought changed the way Elena began looking at everything around her. At first, her investigation was small and cautious. She paid closer attention to routines inside the mansion, the conversations that stopped when she entered a room, and the documents occasionally left unattended during meetings. The Volkov estate functioned like a living system, with information constantly moving between offices, advisors, and security staff. For someone patient enough to observe quietly, small fragments of truth could sometimes appear in unexpected places. Elena had always been good at noticing details. She began spending more time in the mansion's large private library, a quiet space lined with tall wooden shelves and antique furniture. Officially, the room existed for relaxation and study. In reality, it also served as a workspace where members of the organization reviewed reports and stored financial records. Many of the files kept there appeared ordinary at first glance: shipping manifests, investment portfolios, international business agreements. But as Elena carefully examined the documents over several days, patterns slowly began emerging. The Volkov family controlled far more than a simple criminal network. Their influence stretched through international banks, private shipping companies, energy contracts, and several industries that operated across Europe and the United States. Each business appeared legitimate on paper, but the connections between them revealed something far more complex. It was a system designed to move enormous amounts of money without attracting attention, and the marriage alliance between the Carter and Volkov families had been connected to that system. One afternoon, Elena discovered a set of financial documents that mentioned the Carter investment firm. The dates on the files were several months older than the marriage agreement itself. That immediately caught her attention. According to the documents, the Volkov organization had been quietly studying the Carter family's financial collapse long before they offered assistance. Detailed reports outlined the firm's debts, legal vulnerabilities, and the potential benefits of bringing the company under Volkov influence. The conclusion written at the bottom of the report was simple. Acquiring the Carter firm through a marriage alliance would provide access to legitimate American investment channels. Elena stared at the page for a long time. The deal that had supposedly rescued her family had actually been something else entirely. It had been a calculated expansion strategy. That discovery forced Elena to look deeper into the history of the Volkov organization itself. The more she learned, the more intimidating the picture became. Sergei Volkov had begun his career decades earlier during the chaotic years following the collapse of the Soviet Union. While many former officials struggled to survive the sudden changes in power, Sergei had moved quickly to build alliances with emerging criminal networks across Eastern Europe. By the time he relocated many of his operations to the United States, he already controlled an enormous underground financial system. Shipping companies moved goods across international borders. Technology firms transferred funds through complex digital channels. Real estate projects provided legitimate fronts for vast investments. Everything connected back to the Volkov empire, and now Elena had become part of that empire. As the days passed, another tension inside the mansion began attracting her attention. The relationship between Adrian and his father. On the surface, their interactions appeared respectful and controlled. During meetings with advisors or business partners, both men presented a unified image of leadership, but when they spoke privately, subtle differences emerged. Sergei preferred aggressive expansion, often pushing the organization toward riskier operations that promise enormous profits. Adrian, on the other hand, seemed more cautious. He spent long hours reviewing financial reports, questioning advisors, and occasionally canceling projects that Sergei had already approved. Those decisions sometimes created visible frustration among the older members of the organization. The disagreements were never loud, but the tension between father and son was unmistakable. Elena noticed something else as well. Adrian had begun paying attention to her. Not openly, not directly, but there were moments when she would feel his gaze across a room while she examined documents or spoke with staff members. His expression never revealed whether he approved of her curiosity or merely tolerated it. Yet he never stopped her from accessing the library. He never questioned the time she spent studying records. In fact, on several occasions, Elena noticed files appearing on the library desk that seemed strangely relevant to her investigation. It was almost as if someone wanted her to find them. That thought confused her more than anything else, because the story she had heard about Adrian Volkov described a ruthless man capable of eliminating threats without hesitation. Yet his behavior toward her never matched that reputation. He remained distant but not cruel, observant but not controlling. Sometimes Elena even caught brief glimpses of something unexpected in his expression, concern, but she could not be certain. The deeper Elena searched, the more disturbing the connections became. Eventually, her investigation led her to a locked filing cabinet inside one of the smaller office rooms near the library. The cabinet itself appeared unremarkable, but the security system attached to it suggested the documents inside were extremely important. Late one evening, when most of the household staff had retired for the night, Elena returned to the room. The hallway outside was empty. The security cameras positioned along the ceiling slowly rotated in their programmed patterns. She waited carefully until the corridor was clear before stepping inside. Inside the cabinet, several folders contained information about international shipping routes connected to Volkov-owned companies. Most of the data involved financial transfers and port schedules. But one file stood out immediately. It carried Vanessa Carter's name. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she opened the folder. Inside were several printed emails and financial reports. The documents revealed that Vanessa had gained access to certain internal records weeks before the wedding, and those records had exposed something enormous. A hidden operation involving illegal technology exports, moving through American ports and European military contractors. The scale of the operation stretched across multiple countries. If exposed publicly, it would not simply damage the Volkov organization. It could trigger international investigations. Vanessa Carter had discovered it by accident while reviewing documents connected to the Carter investment firm. And according to the final note attached to the file, she had planned to report the information. Elena slowly lowered the papers back onto the desk. For the first time since arriving at the Volkov estate, she fully understood why her sister had run. Vanessa had not been escaping a marriage. She had been escaping a secret powerful enough to destroy the entire Volkov empire. And now Elena held the document proving it. Vanessa Carter had not run from the wedding out of fear. She had run because she had uncovered something deadly. That truth settled heavily in Elena's mind as she stood alone in the quiet office room, the file still open in front of her. The documents she had discovered changed everything she thought she understood about her sister's disappearance. Vanessa had not simply panicked at the idea of marrying Adrian Volkov. She had been trying to escape a secret powerful enough to destroy an international criminal empire. Elena carefully returned the documents to their folder and closed the cabinet, making sure everything looked exactly as she had found it. Her hands moved slowly, controlled, but her thoughts were racing. For days, she had wondered why Vanessa had abandoned the wedding without explanation. She had imagined countless possibilities: fear, rebellion, desperation. Now the truth was far more dangerous. Vanessa had discovered the Volkov organization was involved in a massive illegal operation that reached deep into powerful institutions across the United States and Europe, and she had planned to expose it. That realization forced Elena to reconsider every event leading up to the wedding day. Vanessa's nervous behavior, the strange urgency in her voice during their last conversation, the quiet tension she had tried to hide behind forced smiles. Vanessa had not been afraid of marriage. She had been afraid of what she knew. Over the next several days, Elena continued her investigation with even greater caution. She understood that the information she had discovered placed her in an extremely dangerous position. If the Volkov family realized she knew about the hidden operation, they might not allow her to remain alive long enough to share that knowledge. Yet the need to understand Vanessa's actions pushed Elena forward. She began examining financial records connected to the Carter investment firm, documents that had originally drawn Vanessa into the investigation. Many of those files were stored in the mansion's secure digital archive, accessible only through internal systems used by the Volkov organization. Late at night, when most of the household had retired, Elena quietly accessed a network through one of the library computers. The deeper she searched, the clearer the picture became. Large amounts of money were moving through shell companies tied to shipping ports along the East Coast. The funds passed through legitimate American investment firms before disappearing into accounts located in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Several of the transactions were linked to technology manufacturers and defense contractors. The pattern suggested something enormous: illegal exports, sensitive technology being moved through private shipping routes controlled by the Volkov organization. And the people involved in the transactions were not limited to criminals. Elena discovered the names of powerful American businessmen, political donors, and corporate executives buried within the financial reports. Individuals who publicly presented themselves as respectable members of society were secretly connected to the same operation Vanessa had uncovered. The scope of the conspiracy reached far beyond anything Elena had imagined. If exposed publicly, it could trigger investigations across multiple governments. And that meant Vanessa Carter had been holding information that could threaten not just the Volkov family, but many powerful figures who depended on the operation remaining hidden. Elena began to understand why her sister had disappeared so suddenly. Vanessa had not simply been trying to escape danger. She had been trying to survive it. One evening, while reviewing another set of financial records in the library, Elena sensed someone enter the room behind her. She turned slowly. Adrian Volkov stood near the doorway. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. He had always carried quiet authority, but tonight, something about his expression seemed sharper, more focused. For several seconds, he said nothing. His eyes moved from the computer screen to the files spread across the desk. Then he walked forward slowly. Elena felt her heartbeat quicken as he stopped beside the table. Adrian's voice remained calm when he finally spoke. He asked a simple question. Why was she looking through records connected to international shipping operations? Elena hesitated. She understood immediately that he had already noticed her growing curiosity. The mansion security systems made it nearly impossible for anyone to move through certain areas without being observed. Adrian had likely been aware of her investigation for some time. Yet there was something strange about the way he questioned her. His tone carried curiosity rather than accusation. Elena chose her response carefully. She explained that she had been trying to understand the business arrangements connected to her family's financial rescue. Adrian listened without interrupting. When she finished speaking, he remained silent for several seconds. Then he gave a small nod, as if confirming something he had already suspected. Instead of stopping her investigation, Adrian simply closed the laptop and moved one of the documents slightly closer to her. His eyes met hers for a brief moment. There was no anger in them, only a quiet warning. He told her that curiosity could become dangerous in a place like this. Then he left the room. Elena remained seated at the desk long after he disappeared down the hallway. That brief conversation had raised more questions than answers. Adrian clearly knew she was investigating the organization's secrets, yet he had not tried to stop her. In fact, it almost seemed as though he was allowing her to continue. Meanwhile, the atmosphere inside the Volkov mansion began shifting in other ways. Sergei Volkov had grown noticeably more suspicious in recent days. His meetings with advisors lasted longer. His security teams began monitoring the estate with increased intensity. Several members of the organization arrived unexpectedly from overseas, their presence adding tension to the already uneasy environment. Rumors circulated quietly among the staff. Some claimed Sergei believed someone inside the mansion was leaking information. Others suggested that rival criminal groups had begun investigating the Volkov operations. Whatever the reason, the pressure inside the organization was rising, and Elena could feel Sergei's attention turning toward her. He watched her more closely during family dinners. His questions about her daily activities became more frequent. The old man had spent decades surviving in a world built on suspicion and strategy. If Elena continued searching for answers, it would only be a matter of time before Sergei realized how much she had already discovered. That realization forced Elena to move faster. She returned to the digital archives one final time, searching specifically for records connected to Vanessa's final days before the wedding. Most of the information had already been removed, but one file remained hidden deep inside the system's older backup folders. It contained a list of travel reservations and encrypted messages sent from Vanessa's personal account during the week before the ceremony. Elena carefully opened the file. The information inside sent a shock through her entire body. Vanessa had arranged transportation to multiple locations across the United States. But the final message attached to the file suggested something even more surprising. Vanessa had not been captured. She had successfully escaped. And according to the encrypted communication records, she might still be alive somewhere inside the United States, hiding from the very empire that had tried to trap her. What had begun as a forced marriage between two families was slowly transforming into something far more complicated. Inside the Volkov Empire, loyalty was never permanent. Power was beginning to shift. The discovery that Vanessa Carter might still be alive changed the way Elena viewed every movement inside the mansion. If her sister had escaped with information capable of exposing the Volkov organization, then the situation surrounding the wedding was no longer a simple family crisis. It was a threat to the entire empire. The atmosphere inside the state had already grown tense, but now Elena could sense something even deeper unfolding behind the quiet meetings and guarded conversations. There was a war forming inside the Volkov organization itself. The signs became clearer in the days that followed. Adrian Volkov began spending longer hours away from the mansion, meeting with advisors and security leaders across New York. The number of guards stationed around the estate increased noticeably. Vehicles arrived and departed at all hours of the night. The mansion had always been heavily protected. Now it looked like a fortress preparing for conflict. Elena tried to remain unnoticed as she observed the growing tension around her, but she quickly realized that staying invisible was becoming impossible. Too many people already knew she had replaced Vanessa in the marriage, and if Vanessa truly possessed information capable of exposing the organization, then Elena herself represented a dangerous connection. One evening, as Elena walked through one of the quiet corridors near the library, she noticed Adrian waiting inside the study. He stood beside the large window overlooking the river, his hands resting calmly behind his back. The moment she entered the room, he turned toward her. There was something different in his expression that night. Less distance, more calculation. Without raising his voice, Adrian gestured toward a chair near the desk. Elena hesitated for a moment before sitting. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he spoke with unusual directness. Adrian told her that he knew she had been searching for answers about Vanessa. The statement carried no accusation. It was simply a fact. Elena remained silent, unsure how much he already knew. Adrian continued speaking. He explained that Vanessa's disappearance had created a serious problem inside the Volkov organization. The information she had discovered threatened powerful individuals who support the empire depended on, but the greater danger came from within the family itself. For years, Sergei Volkov had controlled the organization with absolute authority. His methods had built an empire that stretched across continents. Yet those same methods had also created enemies. Adrian revealed something Elena had never expected to hear. He had never supported the arranged marriage with Vanessa Carter. From the beginning, he believed the deal carried too much risk. The Carter investment firm provided useful access to American financial markets, but forcing a marriage alliance to secure that advantage had been his father's decision. Sergei preferred control. Adrian preferred strategy. Their disagreement over the marriage had been only one example of a larger conflict growing between them. Elena listened carefully as Adrian described the internal divisions forming inside the organization. Several senior advisors still supported Sergei's aggressive leadership. Others believed Adrian represented a more stable future for the empire. Vanessa's disappearance had made that divide even more dangerous. Some members of the organization blamed Sergei for allowing the situation to spiral out of control. Others believed Adrian should have prevented the scandal before it ever reached the wedding day. The Volkov Empire had always been powerful. Now it was becoming unstable. Elena realized something important in that moment. This was not simply a criminal organization protecting its secrets. It was a powerful structure beginning to fracture under pressure. And fractures in systems like this rarely remain quiet for long. Adrian's gaze remained steady as he continued explaining the situation. He told Elena that rival criminal groups had already begun watching the Volkov family more closely. For decades, many organizations had waited for an opportunity to weaken Sergei's empire. Vanessa's disappearance had provided that opportunity. Rumors were spreading across international networks. Information was moving between rival factions, and several powerful enemies were preparing to take advantage of the chaos. Elena felt the weight of those words settle slowly in her chest. The situation was far more dangerous than she had imagined. Because if rival groups believed Vanessa carried evidence capable of destroying the Volkov Empire, they would begin searching for her as well. And anyone connected to Vanessa would become a potential target. That included Elena. Adrian confirmed that reality with quiet honesty. He explained that several security teams had already intercepted communications, suggesting Elena herself might be under observation. Criminal organizations often use family members as leverage when hunting valuable information. If Vanessa remained hidden, Elena might be the next easiest way to reach her. For the first time since arriving at the Volkov estate, Elena saw something close to genuine concern in Adrian's expression. He was not protecting her out of kindness. He was protecting her because the situation had become strategically important. But even that practical motivation created a strange shift between them. The distance that had once defined their relationship began changing into something else. Not trust, not friendship, but a cautious alliance. Elena understood that Adrian needed her cooperation if he wanted to understand what Vanessa had discovered before disappearing. And Adrian understood that Elena needed protection if she hoped to survive long enough to find her sister. For now, their goals aligned. Yet outside the mansion walls, the situation was becoming more violent. Over the next several days, reports began arriving about attacks on businesses connected to the Volkov organization. One of their shipping warehouses in New Jersey was destroyed in a suspicious fire. A convoy transporting financial records was intercepted on a highway outside Boston. Several trusted associates disappeared entirely. Each incident carried the same message. The Volkov Empire was under attack. Inside the mansion, the pressure began affecting everyone. Sergei Volkov responded with increasing aggression, ordering investigations and retaliatory strikes against rival groups suspected of involvement. His decisions created even greater tension between himself and Adrian. During one private meeting Elena witnessed from a distance, the disagreement between father and son became openly visible. Sergei demanded immediate retaliation. Adrian argued for caution. The argument ended with neither man fully backing down. The fracture within the Volkov leadership had become impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Elena continued studying the documents connected to Vanessa's investigation. Each piece of information strengthened the same terrifying conclusion. Vanessa had uncovered a secret powerful enough to collapse the entire empire, and now multiple criminal organizations were racing to control that information. Late one night, as Elena stood near the window in her room overlooking the dark grounds of the estate, she noticed something unusual, movement beyond the outer security fence. At first it appeared minor, just shadows shifting between the trees along the edge of the property. But seconds later the alarm system erupted across the mansion. Sharp warning lights flashed across the grounds. Security vehicles raced toward the outer perimeter. Then the first explosion shattered the silence of the night. The blast echoed across the estate as flames rose from one of the security checkpoints near the main gate. Armed guards rushed across the property as gunfire erupted from the darkness beyond the walls. Elena felt the floor tremble beneath her feet. Somewhere outside the mansion, a powerful enemy had decided to strike directly at the Volkov family, and the attack had only just begun. Elena Carter had entered the Volkov world as a powerless replacement bride. Now she held the key to destroying it. The attack on the Volkov estate shattered the fragile balance that had kept the empire standing for decades. By the time the gunfire finally stopped, smoke drifted across the grounds and the once-controlled fortress looked like a battlefield. Emergency lights flashed along perimeter walls. Armed security teams moved quickly through the damaged sections of the estate, searching for remaining threats. The main gate had been nearly destroyed by explosives, and several outer buildings were burning. But the true damage was not the broken walls. It was a chaos spreading through the Volkov organization itself. News of the attack traveled quickly through the network of businesses and criminal alliances connected to Sergei Volkov. Within hours, several key partners began distancing themselves from the family. Others secretly opened negotiations with rival groups. An empire built on fear and control had suddenly begun losing both. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere had transformed into something colder and more desperate. Sergei Volkov responded to the attack with ruthless determination. He ordered immediate retaliation against several suspected rivals, sending armed teams across the city to eliminate anyone believed responsible for the assault. But the strategy only made the situation worse. Several advisors openly questioned his decisions. They warned that escalating violence would attract the attention of federal investigators already suspicious of the Volkov organization. For the first time in decades, Sergei Volkov authority was being challenged. Adrian Volkov watched the chaos carefully. Unlike his father, he did not respond with rage. Instead, he began quietly gathering information. Elena noticed the shift immediately. While Sergei attempted to crush his enemies through force, Adrian spent long hours reviewing reports connected to the hidden operation Vanessa had uncovered. He knew the truth that many others inside the organization still did not understand. The real threat to the Volkov Empire was no longer external. It was the secret Vanessa had discovered, and that secret now rested in Elena's hands. In the days following the attack, Elena returned to the documents she had found in the mansion's archive, but this time she looked beyond the financial records themselves. She searched for something more specific, evidence of Vanessa's final plan. The encrypted communication file she had discovered earlier contained fragments of messages Vanessa had exchanged with an unknown contact before the wedding. Elena carefully examined each line again, searching for patterns that might reveal her sister's intentions. Slowly, the truth began emerging. Vanessa had not simply intended to escape the marriage. She had been preparing to expose the entire criminal operation. The messages described a meeting with investigative journalists who specialized in uncovering international corruption networks. Vanessa had arranged to deliver copies of the financial records she had discovered inside the Carter investment firm, but the plan required careful timing. The wedding itself had been part of the strategy. While the Volkov family focused their attention on the ceremony and the alliance between the two families, Vanessa intended to disappear quietly and deliver the evidence before anyone realized what had happened. Her escape had not been an act of desperation. It had been a calculated move. Elena felt a strange mixture of pride and fear as she pieced together her sister's plan. Vanessa had been willing to risk everything to expose the truth, but something had gone wrong. The journalist she planned to meet had never received the documents, which meant Vanessa might still be hiding somewhere, waiting for the right moment to act. Elena realized something else as well. The evidence Vanessa had gathered was still incomplete, but the documents Elena now possessed could finish the job. Together, they were powerful enough to expose the entire operation. Late one evening, Elena shared this realization with Adrian. They met in the same study where he had confronted her weeks earlier. The room was dimly lit, and outside the windows the estate still showed signs of the recent attack. Adrian listened carefully as Elena explained what she had discovered. For a long moment, he said nothing. The weight of the decision before him was enormous. Destroying the hidden operation would not simply weaken the Volkov Empire. It could collapse it entirely. And the person who would suffer most from that collapse would be his own father. Adrian had spent his entire life inside the organization Sergei Volkov built. Loyalty to family had always been the foundation of the empire's power. But loyalty had limits. If the truth behind the criminal operation became public, it would not only destroy the Volkov Empire, it would expose the powerful elites who had secretly supported it for years. Adrian understood the consequences better than anyone. He also understood that the empire his father had created was already beginning to crumble. The attack on the estate had proven that their enemies were no longer afraid. Silence filled the room as Adrian considered his options. Finally, he spoke. He admitted something Elena had already begun suspecting. The Volkov Empire could not survive the truth that Vanessa had discovered, but perhaps it should not survive. For years, Adrian had attempted to steer the organization toward legitimate operations, slowly reducing the more dangerous activities that Sergei insisted on maintaining. His father had refused every attempt to change. Now the consequences of that refusal had arrived. Adrian made his decision. The truth would come out, but first, he needed to confront the man who had built the empire. The final confrontation between Adrian and Sergei took place in the main office, at the center of a mansion. Elena remained nearby as the two men faced each other across the large desk that had served as a command center for the Volkov organization for decades. Sergei listened as Adrian revealed the evidence Vanessa had discovered. At first, the older man remained silent. Then he laughed. To Sergei Volkov, the idea of destroying his empire to satisfy moral principles seemed absurd. He argued that power had always required sacrifices. The system he created had made their family untouchable for decades. Why destroy it now? Adrian's response was calm but firm. Because the world had changed, and because the empire was already falling apart. Their argument continued for nearly an hour, the tension between father and son filling the room like a storm waiting to break. Finally, Sergei realized something important. Adrian was no longer asking for permission. He had already chosen his path. The confrontation ended without violence, but the message was clear. The Volkov Empire had reached its final turning point. Within days, encrypted copies of the financial records began appearing in the hands of investigative journalists and international authorities. Investigations opened across multiple countries. Several powerful executives connected to the operation were quietly arrested. The criminal network Sergei Volkov had spent decades building began collapsing piece by piece. In the middle of that collapse, Elena finally received the news she had been waiting for. Vanessa Carter was alive. Through one of the journalists who had been part of Vanessa's original plan, Elena learned that her sister had successfully gone into hiding after escaping Chicago. She had been waiting for the right moment to release the evidence safely. Now that moment had arrived. For the first time since the wedding, Elena allowed herself to feel relief. Her sister had survived, but Elena herself had changed. The quiet, observant woman who once stood in the background of her family's life had become someone capable of influencing the fate of powerful organizations. Weeks later, Elena stood alone near the edge of the Volkov estate overlooking the Hudson River. Much of the mansion had grown quieter as the empire's operations slowly shut down. Some members of the organization had disappeared. Others were cooperating with investigators. The future of the Volkov family remained uncertain. Adrian stood somewhere inside the mansion, facing the consequences of the choice he had made. Elena looked out across the water, realizing that she now stood at a crossroads between two worlds. Freedom waited beyond the gates, but the dangerous world she had entered still lingered behind her. And as she turned away from the river, one final thought settled quietly into her mind. Because even after everything that had happened, the Volkov Empire might not be completely gone.